Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about yesterday morning, not this morning. Yesterday morning, I want you to go back there specifically. The alarm went off, or maybe you woke up before it, or maybe you hit snooze twice, or maybe three times. And I want you to remember the first conscious thought you had, not the thought you wish you had, not the thought you would tell someone if they asked. The real thought, the actual first thing that moved through your mind when consciousness arrived and the day made its demands known. For most people, and I mean this without judgment because I have been most people, I have lived this. For most people, that first thought is some variation of the same thing. It is dread, or exhaustion, or a mental rehearsal of everything that went wrong yesterday and everything that could go wrong today. It is the weight of the unfinished, the unresolved, the uncertain. It is the calculation of how many hours of sleep you got and the immediate resignation that it was not enough. It is the phone, reaching for the phone before your feet have touched the floor, before your nervous system has oriented itself, before you have taken a single intentional breath, reaching for that glowing rectangle of other people's urgencies and the world's chaos and the curated highlight reels of lives that are performing happiness rather than living it. And then the day begins, not from a place of intention, not from a place of strength or clarity or purpose, from reaction, from the accumulated weight of everything that arrived in those first unguarded minutes. And the rest of the day, the decisions, the conversations, the work, the relationships, all of it gets filtered through that reactive, depleted, overwhelmed state that was set in motion before you ever stood up. And at the end of that day, somewhere between tired and sleep, a quiet voice asked the question, is this it? Is this the pace? Is this the version of my life that I am going to keep living? Today we are going to answer that question with a full-throated, evidence-based, life-changing no, this is not it. This does not have to be it. And the place where everything changes, the specific, precise, almost shockingly accessible place where the trajectory of your entire life can be redirected, is the morning. Not the app you download, not the supplement you take, not the journal you buy and then lose behind your nightstand. The morning itself, the architecture of what happens in those first hours after your eyes open. That is where the world's highest achievers do something different, something hidden. Not hidden because it is a secret. It is hiding in plain sight, documented in interviews and biographies and the daily rhythms of the most extraordinary people who've ever lived. It is hidden because most of us have never been taught to look for it. Never been taught to understand what those hours actually are and what they actually do to the rest of your life. That is what today is about, the hidden morning formula. And I promise you, by the time we are done here, you will never look at a morning the same way again. Let me start with a truth that might make you uncomfortable. The life you are living right now is the product of your habits, not your talent, not your intelligence, not your circumstances. Those circumstances matter, and I am not dismissing them. But at the level of your daily output, the quality of your work, the depth of your relationships, the clarity of your thinking, the momentum or the stagnation in your progress toward the things that matter most to you, all of it, every single piece of it is downstream from your habits. The things you do automatically without thinking every single day, especially in the morning. Aristotle said it centuries ago. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. Think about what that means. Excellence is not a talent you either have or you do not have. He would decide to stop checking his phone first thing. He would reach for it before he was fully conscious. The pattern never broke because Marcus was trying to change his behaviors without understanding what was driving them. He was treating the symptoms without diagnosing the disease. And the disease, as I'm going to explain, was this. Marcus had no morning architecture. He had no intentional structure for those first hours of the day. So every morning, the default architecture, the anxiety, the reactivity, the phone, the frantic getting ready, the coffee-fueled lurch into the day's demands, that default architecture was running his life while he thought he was running it. The change came when Marcus got sick. Not catastrophically sick, a health scare that turned out to be manageable, but serious enough to force a reckoning. Serious enough to put him in a hospital bed for 4 days with nothing to do but think. And in that hospital bed, with the phone in a drawer and the television off and the noise of his normal life temporarily suspended, Marcus had a conversation with himself that he had been avoiding for decades. He asked himself, one question. If this is the last decade I have, really the last decade, not hypothetically, what do I want it to look like? Not what should it look like? What do I want? What would I choose with full agency, full permission, full honesty if I were choosing rather than just continuing? The answer surprised him. It was not dramatic. It was not a complete dismantling of his existing life. It was a set of small, specific, deeply personal things. He wanted to write. He had always wanted to write. Had carried a half-finished novel in his head for 15 years. He wanted to be stronger physically. Not for vanity, but because he could feel his body softening in ways that frightened him. He wanted to think more clearly, to feel more present, to stop the sensation of days blurring into each other at a speed he could not control. He wanted to feel by the end of a day that he had genuinely done something that mattered. None of these things required a new life. They required a new morning. Marcus went home from the hospital and he rebuilt his first 2 hours, deliberately, based not on what a productivity guru told him to do, but based on what he himself needed, based on the question of what would have to be true about his morning for him to feel like the day was already a success, already aligned, already worthy of his one wild and precious life. Within 3 months, he had written 40,000 words of his novel. Within a year, he had lost 22 pounds without ever going on a diet. Within 2 years, he had left his job and was doing work that felt like a calling rather than an obligation. Not because he was smarter than he had been. Not because the world had become easier, but because he had changed the architecture of his mornings, and the architecture of his mornings had changed the architecture of everything else. That is the power we are talking about today. That is what is at stake. Let me now take you into the formula. Not as a prescription, hear me clearly on this, not as a prescription, but as a set of principles illustrated by the lives of some of the most extraordinary human beings who have ever walked this earth. And I want you, as we go through each one, to be asking yourself, not can I copy this exactly, but how does this principle apply to my life? How can I honor this principle within the context of my actual mornings, my actual constraints, my actual rhythms? The first principle of the hidden morning formula is this. High achievers own the first hour. They do not let it happen to them. They happen to it. This distinction is everything. Most of us experience our mornings. We move through them reactively. The alarm, the snooze, the groggy negotiation with consciousness, the phone, the news, the email, the social media scroll, the kitchen chaos, the getting out the door scramble. Things happen to us and we respond. We are in a passive relationship with our mornings and therefore with the beginning of our days. And a passive relationship with your morning is a passive relationship with your life. The world's high achievers are in an active relationship with their mornings. They have decided in advance what those hours will contain. They have made agreements with themselves about how the first hour, or the first 30 minutes, or the first 90 minutes, whatever they have available, how that time will be used. And they protect those agreements with a ferocity that can look, from the outside, like rigidity or antisocial behavior or obsession. Howard Schultz, who built Starbucks from a small Seattle company into one of the most recognized brands on the planet, has talked about rising at 4:30 every morning to work out before the rest of his day begins, not because he is a masochist. Because he understood early on that if he did not carve out that time before the world made its claims on him, the world's claims would expand to fill every available space. The morning was the only time that was genuinely his. Everything after it belonged, in various measures, to other people. Oprah Winfrey, a woman who grew up in poverty, who faced abuse and disadvantage and systematic discrimination, who had every reason to believe that the life she wanted was not available to her, has spoken about the importance of her mornings, about the stillness she protects before the day begins. The meditation, the reflection, the intentional moment of gratitude that sets a frame for everything that follows. She is not doing this because she has time to do it. She is doing this because she has built her entire operating system around the understanding that how she enters the day determines what she does with the day. And I know what some of you are thinking. These are billionaires. These are people with personal chefs and private gyms and assistants who manage their schedules. Of course, they can own the first hour. I have to pack lunches and get children to school and manage a body that does not always cooperate and a mind that is carrying things that these people cannot imagine. I hear that. And it is true that circumstances create different constraints, and I am not here to minimize those constraints. But I want to push back gently on the assumption that owning your morning is a luxury of the already successful. Because the evidence actually suggests the opposite. The morning discipline often precedes the success rather than following. The architecture of the morning is often what makes the success possible in the first place. These people did not get a protected morning after they made it. They made it in part because they protected the morning. Moreover, and this is critical, owning the first hour does not require a specific amount of time. It requires a specific quality of intention. You can own 20 minutes, you can claim 30. If your morning is genuinely constrained to the point where the only available space is the 4 minutes in the shower, you can own those 4 minutes with a quality of presence and intention that changes what you carry into the rest of your day. It is not about how much time you have. It is about what you do with the time you have. It is about the decision to be active rather than passive, intentional rather than reactive, present rather than already somewhere else in your mind before your body has left the building. Own the first hour, whatever that means for your life. Own it. The second principle. High achievers use the morning to access the deeper mind before the surface mind takes over. This one requires some explanation. And I want to be careful here not to get too technical, because this is a speech, not a neuroscience lecture. But I need you to understand something about how your brain operates across the day, because it is foundational to everything else we are going to talk about. When you wake up in the morning, your brain is in a state that is different from the state it is in 4 hours later. In the first minutes and early hours after waking, particularly if you have not yet aggressively stimulated your nervous system with news and social media and caffeine and crisis, your brain is operating in what neuroscientists describe as a more flexible, associative, creative mode. The analytical, critical, judgment-heavy prefrontal cortex, which will dominate most of your waking day, has not yet fully come online. And in the space before it does, you have access to a layer of your mind that is more intuitive, more connected, more capable of the kind of pattern recognition and creative synthesis that produces breakthrough thinking. Artists have known this for centuries without the neuroscience to explain it. Writers who describe waking up and immediately going to the page, before making coffee, before checking anything, before interacting with another human being, they are not just being precious about their process, they are accessing a neurological window. They are capitalizing on a state of the brain that is genuinely more generative, more permissive, more capable of the unexpected connection and the original idea than the analytical daytime mind. Beethoven reportedly kept a notebook by his bed and would sometimes compose while still half asleep, capturing musical ideas that his waking, critical mind might have dismissed. Charles Darwin did his serious thinking in the early morning, before the demands of correspondence and family life could interrupt him. Toni Morrison wrote before dawn, before the rest of the household woke up, not because she was a morning person, but because she had learned that the light coming up in the sky in the early morning did something to her creative mind that she could not replicate at any other time of day. Maya Angelou is perhaps the most striking example. She would rise early and go, not to a fancy office, not to a beautifully appointed study, to a small, plain, deliberately spare hotel room that she rented near her home. She kept it entirely free of stimulation. No art on the walls. Nothing to catch the eye or distract the mind. And in that bare room, in those early morning hours, she accessed the creative depth that produced some of the most extraordinary literature of the 20th century. What was she protecting the access to that deeper layer? She was building a container, a physical, temporal, intentional container, in which the surface mind, with all its busyness and judgment and self-criticism and social anxiety, could not immediately crowd out the deeper, more original, more truthful, creative self. You do not need to rent a hotel room, but you do need to understand what you are protecting and why. The morning is the window. The early hours are when the deeper mind is accessible. And every minute you spend in reactive mode, in the news cycle, in the email, in the social media scroll, You are slamming that window shut before you've looked through it. Through it, too. The practice here is simple in concept and hard in execution. Before you let the outside world in, spend some time inside. Before you receive the world's inputs, generate some of your own outputs. Right. Think. Pray or meditate or simply sit with your own consciousness for a few minutes. Ask the question that has been waiting for your attention. Let the idea that is almost formed find the space to fully form. Find the space to fully form. Create before you consume. Create before you consume. Write that somewhere. Because it is one of the most transformative habits a person can build, and most of us are doing the exact opposite. We consume the moment we open our eyes and we wonder why. By the time we sit down to do our most important work, we feel like we have nothing original to offer. We have filled ourselves up with everyone else's thinking and left no room for our own. The third principle. High achievers use the morning to move their bodies in order to move their minds. I want to talk about exercise, but not in the way exercise usually gets talked about. Not as weight loss or athletic performance or the aesthetics of the physical body. I want to talk about what physical movement in the morning does to the brain, because this is where the hidden formula becomes almost magical. When you exercise, even moderately, even a 30-minute walk, even 20 minutes of movement that elevates your heart rate, your brain releases a cascade of neurochemicals: dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. These are the same chemicals that the most commonly prescribed antidepressants and focus medications are designed to influence. Except when you generate them through exercise, you get them without the side effects, without the prescription, without the lag time of pharmaceutical intervention. You get them immediately, and you get them at exactly the moment when you are about to sit down and do the most important cognitive work of your day. Dr. John Ratey at Harvard Medical School has spent decades studying what he calls the neuroscience of exercise. He has documented how even brief bouts of aerobic activity, a brisk 20-minute walk, can improve attention, memory, mood, and the capacity for creative and complex thinking for hours afterward. He calls exercise miracle grow for the brain. Not because he is being poetic, because he is literally describing what the research shows about BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that is released during exercise and that supports the growth and resilience of neurons. Richard Branson, who has founded and run hundreds of companies across dozens of industries and is by any measure one of the most productive human beings on the planet, has said that exercise is his single greatest productivity hack. He has estimated that the morning workout gives him an additional 4 hours of productive output per day. 4 hours from a workout, not from a new software tool or a better time management system or hiring more people, from moving his body. Barack Obama, throughout his presidency, one of the most demanding and high-stakes leadership roles on the planet, maintained a 6 days a week morning workout. Not because he had nothing else to do with that time, because he understood that the quality of every decision he would make that day, every word he would say, every crisis he would navigate was directly connected to the state of his body and his mind. He was investing in his own cognitive infrastructure before the day made its withdrawals. And I understand that the idea of morning exercise can feel like an accusation for some people. It can feel like one more thing you should be doing but are not. One more entry on the ledger of self-improvement that gets tallied against you. I am not saying this to make you feel guilty. I am saying this because I want you to understand the mechanism. Once you understand why it works, once you understand that you are not just burning calories but literally manufacturing the chemicals your brain needs to function at its highest level, the motivation shifts. You stop doing it because a productivity guru told you to, and you start doing it because you understand viscerally that the version of you that moves is fundamentally more capable than the version of you that does not. It does not have to be an hour. It does not have to be a gym. A walk outside in natural light, which also regulates your circadian rhythm and your serotonin production in ways that affect your entire day's mood and energy, is enough to activate the mechanism. Dance in your kitchen, do yoga in your living room. Whatever it takes to get the blood moving, the heart rate up, the body awake and responsive and alive. Do that. And do it before you sit down to do the work that matters most to you. Because the version of you that sits down after movement is not the same person as the one who sits down without it. That person is sharper, calmer, more focused, more creative, more resilient, more capable of handling what the day is about to deliver. Move your body to move your mind. This is principle 3. It is not optional. It is infrastructure. Principle 4. High achievers begin the day with intention, not information. We live in the most information-saturated era in human history. At any moment, with the device that fits in your pocket, you can access more information than was contained in the great library of Alexandria, the library that ancient scholars consider the sum of human knowledge. You can watch news from every corner of the planet in real time. You can be in conversation with hundreds of people simultaneously. You can track developments in politics, economics, science, culture, and the lives of people you know and people you have never met, all with the swipe of a finger. This is extraordinary. This is extraordinary. And it is also one of the most dangerous things that has ever happened to human productivity and human well-being. Because our brains were not designed for this volume of information. They were not designed for the pace at which information now arrives. They were not designed for the emotional intensity of a global news cycle that is specifically calibrated to trigger fear and outrage, because those are the emotions that drive engagement. They were not designed for the social comparison that is hardwired into every platform, the constant implicit question of how your life measures up to the curated presentation of everyone else's. And we begin our days with this. We reach for the phone, and within 60 seconds, we have ingested an undifferentiated avalanche of information. Most of it alarming, much of it irrelevant to our actual lives, all of it designed by algorithms to capture and hold our attention rather than to serve our well-being or our purpose. The result is that by the time we get out of bed, we are already reactive, already anxious, already carrying the emotional weight of stories that have nothing to do with the life we are trying to build. And we take that weight into every conversation, every decision, every moment of the day. We are operating from reaction rather than intention. We are responding to the world's agenda rather than living our own. The world's high achievers do something radical. They delay the information. They create a buffer, a period of time in the morning before any news or social media or email enters their consciousness, in which they set their own intention for the day, in which they determine proactively what matters to them and what they are trying to accomplish before the world has a chance to rearrange their priorities. Tim Ferriss, after interviewing hundreds of the most successful people across dozens of fields for his work, identified one of the most consistent morning practices among high achievers: this. Before any information comes in, they ask 2 questions. What would make today great? And what am I grateful for? The first question is about intention. It directs the mind forward toward what you want to create rather than backward toward what you are anxious about. The second question is about state. Gratitude is not just a feel-good practice. It is a neurological intervention. Gratitude activates the brain's reward circuitry, produces dopamine, counteracts the threat detection mechanism that anxiety runs through, and shifts the brain from a contracted defensive state to an open receptive one. It literally changes the operating system. But beyond these specific practices, the principle is simply this. Decide who you are going to be today before anyone else gets a vote. Set your intention, your deepest, truest intention, before the noise arrives, before the email tells you what is urgent, before the news tells you what to be afraid of, before social media tells you what to want or who you should compare yourself to. Before anyone else has had a chance to colonize your morning with their agenda. What do you want to bring to this day? What matters to you? What are you building? What kind of person do you want to be in the interactions that are coming? What is the most important thing? Not the most urgent thing, the most important thing that you want to make progress on today? Answer those questions before anything else. And then, when the information arrives, you will not be swept away by it. You will have an anchor. You will have a center of gravity that is yours, built by you, aligned with your values and your purpose. And from that anchored place, you can engage with the world's information without being consumed by it. Consumed by it. That is principle 4. Begin with intention, not information. Set the agenda of your own mind before anyone else can. Principle 5. High achievers protect their sleep like it is the source of everything. Because it is. I know that talking about sleep in a speech about morning routine seems like going backwards. But it is impossible to talk about transformative mornings without talking about what comes before them. Because the most sophisticated morning routine in the world is built on sand if the person executing it is chronically sleep deprived. Matthew Walker, the neuroscientist and sleep researcher, has called sleep the single most effective thing we can do to reset our brain and body health each day. And the word reset is worth dwelling on. Because what happens during sleep is not passive recovery, it is active transformation. Your brain during deep sleep is doing things that it literally cannot do while you are awake. It is consolidating memories, taking the information of the day, and moving it from short-term storage into long-term understanding. It is making connections between disparate pieces of information. This is where the morning creative accessibility comes from. The reason the deeper mind is available in the early hours is in part because of the neural synthesis that happened during the night. It is clearing metabolic waste products from the brain, including proteins associated with cognitive decline. It is regulating hormones that govern mood, appetite, immune function, and stress response. When you are chronically sleep deprived, all of these processes are disrupted. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment, planning, impulse control, and complex reasoning, literally underperforms. You make worse decisions, more reactive ones, more fear based ones. You are less creative, less empathetic, less able to regulate your emotions, less able to sustain focus. You are operating on a brain that has not been fully serviced, and you are wondering why performance is suffering. Here is a statistic that should stop everyone in this room cold. Research by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine has found that adults who sleep 6 hours per night perform as poorly on cognitive tests as adults who have gone without sleep entirely for 24 hours. 6 hours. A number that a huge percentage of high-performing adults consider a badge of honor. I only need 6 hours. No, you do not only need 6 hours. You have adapted to functioning at reduced cognitive capacity because you have been doing it for so long that you have forgotten what full capacity feels like. Every founder who brags about sleeping 4 hours is leaving half their brain on the table. Every executive who answers emails at midnight is damaging the very cognitive infrastructure that their success depends on. Every high achiever who treats sleep as a variable to be compressed in service of more productivity is, through that very compression, limiting the quality of the productivity they are trying to protect. This is not a lecture to make you feel bad about your sleep habits. It is an invitation to reclaim the most powerful performance tool available to you, the one that requires no subscription, no equipment, and no special skill, and that you have been undervaluing because the culture has convinced you that the sacrifice of sleep is the price of ambition. The world's genuine high achievers, the ones who have sustained extraordinary performance over decades rather than burning brilliantly for a few years before collapsing, they sleep. Jeff Bezos has publicly stated that he prioritizes 8 hours. LeBron James reportedly sleeps 10 to 12 hours per night and credits his sleep regimen as a key factor in his ability to sustain elite athletic performance into his late 30s and beyond. Ariana Huffington had a collapse from exhaustion that became the turning point that led her to write an entire book about the transformative power of sleep. She calls it one of the most important decisions she ever made. To sleep, to simply radically, counterculturally sleep. Protect your sleep, protect your sleep. Your morning is only as good as what happened the night before. If you want to transform your mornings, begin with your evenings. Begin with the decision that rest is not weakness. Rest is the foundation on which extraordinary performance is built. Principle 6. Principle 6. High achievers use the morning to practice what they are becoming, not to catch up on what they have not yet done. This is subtle but profound, and I want to spend real time here. Most of us, when we think about the morning, think about it as a catching up mechanism, as the place where we try to get ahead on the inbox, or squeeze in the workout we skipped yesterday, or review the notes for the meeting we did not prepare for properly. The morning becomes a remediation space, a place where we try to make up for the shortfalls of the day, or the week, or the year, or the year. The world's high achievers use the morning for something completely different. They use it as a practice space. as the place where they deliberately rehearse and reinforce the habits, skills, and qualities of the person they are in the process of becoming. There is a psychological principle here that is enormously powerful. Identity formation is not a passive process. You don't simply discover who you are and then live from that fixed identity. You are continuously creating yourself through your choices, your actions, and your self-perception. The things you do repeatedly become the things that define you. And there is a mechanism by which this works that is worth understanding. Every morning workout is a vote for the identity of a person who takes care of their body. Every morning writing session is a vote for the identity of a writer. Every morning meditation is a vote for the identity of a person who is present and centered. Every morning without the phone scroll is a vote for the identity of someone who is intentional rather than reactive. And the accumulation of these votes over days, weeks, months, years builds an identity so solid and self-reinforcing that behavior eventually becomes effortless. Not because it got easier, because it became who you are. James Dyson, the inventor and entrepreneur who famously created 5,127 prototypes before his vacuum cleaner worked, speaks about the practice of creation. Not the breakthrough moment, not the launch, not the success, the daily practice. The practice of showing up to the work every morning and doing it, whether or not inspiration arrives, whether or not the result is good. Because what the daily practice builds more than skill is the identity of someone who shows up. And someone who shows up over time compounds their skill to a level that someone who waits for inspiration can never match. Kobe Bryant, one of the most decorated athletes in basketball history, a man who won 5 NBA championships and was considered by many the greatest player of his generation, was famous for arriving at the gym at 4 in the morning. Years and years of 4 in the morning. Not because he needed to practice more than everyone else when he was at the peak of his career. Because the practice was not just skill building, it was identity maintenance. Every morning at 4 in the morning, Kobe was voting for the identity of the hardest working person in the room. He was maintaining the character architecture that made him who he was. And when game day arrived and the pressure was at its most intense, he did not have to manufacture greatness from scratch. He had already been living it in the dark before anyone was watching every single morning. What are you practicing in your mornings? Not just as a skill, but as an identity. Who are you rehearsing being? Because the morning is the rehearsal space and the rest of the day is the performance. And the reason so many people feel like they are underperforming in the performance is that they are not doing the rehearsal. Use your morning to practice who you are becoming, not to catch up on who you have not yet been. The forward momentum of practice is transformative. The backward momentum of remediation is exhausting. Choose forward. Principle 7. The final principle of the hidden morning formula. High achievers end each morning with a declaration of commitment, not a to-do list. I want to talk about the difference between a to-do list and a commitment declaration because they represent two fundamentally different relationships to your own agency in your life. A to-do list is a series of tasks. It is organized around completion. Around the satisfying crossing off of items. It is at its core reactive. It is a response to the world's demands on your time. It is the accumulation of other people's requests, your own obligations, the machinery of the life you are already running. There is nothing wrong with a to-do list as an organizational tool. But as a vision of your day, as a frame for what matters and why, it is insufficient. It keeps you operating at the level of managing your life rather than building it. A commitment declaration is different. It is a statement, sometimes written, sometimes spoken aloud, sometimes held quietly in the mind, of what you are committed to today. Not just what you will do, but why it matters. Not just the tasks, but the values they serve. Not just the agenda, but the person you are bringing to it. A Navy SEAL, and I mention them not as a model for all of us to emulate, but because their culture of extreme performance under extreme conditions has produced insights about the human capacity for accomplishment that are broadly applicable. Navy SEAL use a form of mental rehearsal as a core performance tool. Before an operation, before any high-stakes engagement, they run through the scenario in their minds, not the fear, not the possible failures, the execution. They see themselves performing at their best. They commit mentally to the standard they are going to uphold. They enter the operational space with an internal commitment already in place. The research on mental rehearsal is extensive and compelling. Studies with athletes, surgeons, musicians, and military personnel have consistently shown that mental rehearsal, vivid, specific, emotionally engaged mental rehearsal, activates the same neural pathways as actual physical practice. The brain, at the level of neural activation, does not fully distinguish between vividly imagined performance and actual performance. The mental rehearsal builds the neural grooves of excellence in the same way the physical practice does. What would it mean to begin your morning with a commitment declaration? To say out loud or in writing or in whatever form feels real and true for you. Today I am committed to showing up fully in my work. Today I am committed to being present with the people I love. Today I am committed to the standard of excellence that represents who I am. Today I am committed to making progress on the thing that matters most, even if that progress is small. Today I am committed to being the kind of person I want to have been when I look back at this day. That is not magical thinking. That is not affirmation culture empty positivity. That is the deliberate alignment of your psychological resources around a clear intention. It is the activation of your own agency. It is the statement that you are not just going to react to today, you are going to lead it. From the inside out. The commitment declaration takes 2 minutes. It costs nothing, and it changes the entire psychological architecture of the day. Because you do not enter the day as a passenger, you enter it as the driver, and the driver has options that the passenger does not. Now, let me pull it all together. Because I want you to see the formula whole, not just as a list of principles, but as a living system. What the world's high achievers have discovered, mostly intuitively, sometimes deliberately, is that the morning is the only time in the day that genuinely belongs to them. After the morning, the day belongs to the world, to the demands and the people and the crises and the schedules and the obligations that cannot be avoided. But the morning, that space before the world wakes up and makes its claims, that space is yours, if you claim it. And in that claimed space, they do something that the rest of the world is not doing. They take ownership of their psychological state. They choose, deliberately, the internal conditions from which they will operate. They fill themselves up with movement, with intention, with creative output, with connection to what matters most, so that when the world starts drawing from them, there is something real and deep to draw from. Most people arrive at their most important work of the day already depleted, already reactive, already anxious, already fragmented by the morning's passive reception of everything the world threw at them. They are running on empty before, and they wonder why they feel behind, why they never feel like they are enough, why the gap between who they are and who they want to be never seems to close. The morning is where that gap gets closed. Not in big dramatic leaps, but in the daily compounding, invisible but inexorable accumulation of mornings where you showed up for yourself first, where you built before you managed, where you created before you consumed, where you chose your identity before someone else could assign one to you. I want to tell you about one more person before we close today. A woman named Harriet Tubman. And I know that the name Harriet Tubman in the context of a speech about morning routines might seem surprising. But bear with me because her story illuminates everything we have been talking about in the most extraordinary way. Harriet Tubman escaped slavery in 1849. She walked 90 miles alone through hostile territory, navigating by the North Star to reach freedom. And then, in one of the most astonishing acts of courage in American history, she went back. 13 times. She returned 13 times to the most dangerous environment she had ever survived to guide other enslaved people to freedom. She is credited with personally freeing over 70 people. Not one was captured on her watch. Not one. How does a person do that? How does a human being find the courage and the clarity and the strategy to go back again and again into a situation where capture meant death? Her knowledge of the landscape and her ability to read it were extraordinary. But there is something else that gets less attention. Harriet Tubman was known for her discipline, for her preparation, for the way she managed the internal resources of the people she was guiding. She would not allow them to turn back. Once they started, they went. She understood in a way that was years ahead of modern psychology that the moment of decision had to happen before the fear arrived. That preparation was not optional. That the internal state of the person walking was as critical as the physical path they were walking on. She was, in her way, practicing the hidden morning formula. She was managing the internal architecture of herself and the people she was responsible for, so that when the moment of maximum difficulty arrived, they were not starting from scratch. They were drawing from a reservoir that had already been built. You are building something every single morning, either intentionally or by default. Either a reservoir of clarity, strength, intention, and identity, or a deficit of reactivity, anxiety, and exhaustion. And the thing you are building in the morning is the thing you will draw from when the difficulty arrives, when the crisis comes, when the test appears, when the moment arrives that asks you to be more than you think you can be. I want to leave you with this. The morning is not just the beginning of the day. The morning is the autobiography of your life, written one chapter at a time, before anyone else is awake to influence the plot. The morning is where you decide in practice rather than in theory who you are and what you are building. The morning is the investment that the rest of your life draws interest from. It is the root system that determines what the tree can hold when the wind comes. Every extraordinary person you have ever admired, every person whose level of achievement, of peace, of impact, of aliveness has ever made you think, I want that, I want to live like that. Every one of them had a morning, every single one. Their morning looked different from yours. Their constraints and resources and rhythms were different, but the principle was the same. They took those early hours seriously. They built something in the quiet before the noise. They showed up for themselves before they showed up for anyone else. And here is the most important thing I can tell you. They were not different from you. They were not specially endowed with discipline or willpower or natural inclination toward early rising. Many of them were not morning people. Many of them had to fight for every early alarm, had to rebuild the habit after breaking it, had to recommit again and again. But they kept coming back to it because they knew what it gave them, because they had felt the difference between a morning with the formula and a morning without it. Because they were unwilling to give up the most powerful hours of the day to default and drift and the tyranny of the reactive. You have those hours too. They are waiting for you tomorrow morning. Right now, tonight, you have the opportunity to make one decision that will change the direction of tomorrow. Set the alarm a little earlier. Decide what the first hour will contain. Protect the space before the phone. Move the body. Sit with the deeper mind. Set the intention. Practice who you are becoming and commit. Not perfectly, not permanently, just tomorrow and then the morning after that and the one after that. And if you miss a morning, which you will, because you are human, because life is imperfect, because the discipline of a transformed life is not built in a single decision, but in the 10,000 recommitments after the first one fails. If you miss a morning, you start again. Without judgment. Without the story that missing one day means the whole commitment is broken. You simply start again. The morning will always be there, waiting, offering itself to you again, ready to be owned or surrendered, claimed or lost, used or squandered. The formula is simple. Own the hours before the world wakes up. Access the deeper mind before the surface mind takes over. Move your body to move your mind. Begin with intention, not information. Protect the sleep that makes everything possible. Practice who you are becoming. And commit to the day with the full weight of your agency. That is the hidden formula. It was never really hidden. It was always available to you. It has always been yours. The only question that remains is the same question Marcus asked himself in that hospital bed. The question that Harriet Tubman answered with her feet in the dark, walking toward freedom. The question that Kobe answered in the gym at 4 in the morning, year after year, in the silence before the world arrived. What are you willing to build before anyone is watching? Because what you build there in those early hours, in the quiet, in the dark, in the space before the noise, that is what will still be standing when everything else is tested. Go build it, starting tomorrow morning. The world is waiting for what only you, fully awake, fully intentional, fully alive, can bring to it. Do not make it wait any longer.